Imagine this. A family member passes away in late November. The memorial service is held in early December. Loved ones gather, they grieve, they say their goodbyes, but the actual burial? That will not happen until May of the following year. Now imagine something else. Imagine passing away in a community where the nearest medical examiner is over 1,000 miles away, separated by entire mountain ranges, with no roads connecting your town to the rest of the continent. In this scenario, the local hearse is not a polished black Cadillac. It is a twin-engine cargo plane, punching through whiteout blizzard conditions at 20,000 feet. This is not fiction. This is not exaggeration. This is the standard operating procedure for the business of dying in the last frontier. In almost every modern society on Earth, the logistics of death are quiet, predictable, and highly localized. A local funeral home takes over the process, and within a matter of days, the deceased is buried in the local earth. The system is built entirely on proximity, predictability, and paved roads. But pull up a topographical map of Alaska, and you will quickly realize that proximity and predictability simply do not exist here. In Alaska, death is not just an emotional and cultural event. It is a massive, highly complex infrastructure and supply chain problem. And today, we are pulling back the curtain on the brutal hidden reality of the Alaskan mortuary business, where the environment itself actively fights against the industry of death. To understand why this industry is so unlike any other, you first have to look at the ground itself. For 6 to 8 months out of the year, depending on the latitude, the topsoil across much of Alaska freezes completely solid. It essentially becomes as hard as reinforced concrete. If a cemetery crew tries to use standard heavy machinery, like a backhoe, to dig a grave in the dead of winter, the steel buckets will spark, scrape, and often physically break against the frozen earth. And even if a crew manages to chip through, the violent force required fractures the surrounding ground, deeply compromising the structural stability of every adjacent gravesite. Because the physical act of digging is geographically impossible for most of the year, the Alaska death care industry has developed a systemic bottleneck. It is called the receiving vault. If a person dies in Anchorage, Fairbanks, or any of the surrounding municipalities between October and April, they cannot be buried immediately. Instead, cemeteries rely on massive, climate-controlled storage facilities. The deceased are placed into temporary concrete cribs or specialized holding vaults, sometimes remaining there for over half a year. Families hold their memorial services in the dead of winter, but they are forced to wait. They wait for the spring thaw, usually arriving in late May or early June, for the ground to soften enough to safely excavate a plot. When late spring finally arrives, cemeteries transition into mass burial operations, conducting dozens of delayed interments in a matter of weeks, just to clear out the winter backlog. But in regions further north, in places like Utqiagvik or the deep interior, the ground never fully thaws at all. This is the permafrost zone. Permafrost is a thick subsurface layer of soil that remains frozen year-round, and burying a body in permafrost introduces a deeply unsettling geological variable. It is called subsidence. As global temperatures shift, the upper layers of this permafrost have begun to thaw. When the ice trapped inside the soil melts, the ground physically sinks and warps. For cemeteries built on this permafrost, the earth becomes highly unstable. Water pools into the cavities left by the melting ice, which accelerates the thaw, causing the land itself to collapse or erode. In these northern regions, cemeteries are engaged in a constant, losing battle against geology. Grave sites shift. Mounds collapse. The landscape of the cemetery is constantly altered by the melting earth below it. Burying someone in permafrost means accepting one simple fact: the ground will not remain still. The frozen ground, however, is only the beginning of the logistical nightmare. The true complexity of the Alaskan death industry is revealed when you look at the state's transportation map. Alaska is 1/5 the size of the entire contiguous United States, yet only a tiny fraction of the state is connected by a road system. Hundreds of communities, known collectively as Bush, Alaska, are entirely isolated. They are accessible only by air, by boat, or by winter ice roads. If an unexpected or unattended death occurs in one of these remote villages, state law often dictates that an autopsy must be performed to determine the exact cause of death. But there are no medical examiners stationed in the Aleutian Islands, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, or the deep interior. The state medical examiner's office is centrally located in Anchorage, so the deceased must be physically transported across hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles of roadless wilderness. You cannot drive a hearse from a village like Barrow down to Anchorage. The hearse, in this case, is an aircraft. Human remains immediately become a heavily regulated category of air cargo. According to strict state logistics and Alaska air cargo regulations, human remains must be accompanied by an official death certificate and a transit permit, and they must be secured inside tightly closed, leak-proof containers or specialized transport cases. These final flights are conducted by major regional airlines and small, independent bush pilots operating Cessnas and Pipers. These pilots navigate treacherous weather, high winds, and remote, unpaved runways to transport the deceased back to the rail belt for forensic processing. And when the medical examiner has concluded their work, the logistics run in reverse. The body must be flown back out to the village for final rites. The entire rural mortuary supply chain rests on aviation fuel, specialized cargo permits, and clear skies. As with everything in Alaska, extreme geography comes with an extreme price tag. In the lower 48 states, the median cost of a traditional burial is roughly $7,000 to $8,000. In Alaska, the baseline median cost for a standard burial is officially listed around $7,225. But that baseline figure completely ignores the logistical tax placed on rural residents. If a family living in a remote village wants a traditional burial for their loved one, they must purchase a casket from a major hub like Anchorage or Seattle. Caskets are incredibly heavy, often weighing well over 200 pounds, empty, and they are extremely bulky, taking up massive amounts of dimensional space. Shipping a heavy wooden casket on a small cargo plane is astronomically expensive, because air freight is calculated by both weight and dimensional volume. When you combine the cost of the initial flight to the medical examiner, the cost of flying the prepared body back, and the air freight cost of a traditional casket, the transportation logistics alone can easily rival or even double the cost of the entire funeral. And if a family chooses to transport privately without coordinating through a funeral home to save money, they are still entirely financially responsible for the massive air cargo fees. It is a financial burden that can instantly bankrupt rural families. This brutal economic reality has driven a profound structural shift in how Alaskans approach death. It is a shift driven not entirely by cultural preference, but heavily by shipping weight. Cremation has become highly prevalent across the state. In 2026, the average cost of a direct cremation in Alaska sits around $1,935. While that figure is slightly higher than the national average, the true economic relief is found in the logistics of the return trip. Shipping an urn of cremated remains via a bush plane or through the United States Postal Service bypass mail system is exponentially cheaper and easier than chartering specialized cargo space for a 300-pound casket. Geography and physics have forced cremation to become the most viable logistical option for much of the state, turning fire into a necessary alternative to the frozen, inaccessible earth. Death is the one universal human experience, but the exact way a society handles it reveals the severe constraints of its environment. In most parts of the world, the mortuary business is an exercise in quiet solemnity, tucked away seamlessly from the daily operations of infrastructure and supply chains. But in Alaska, the industry of death is forced out into the open, battling the very elements that define the state. It is an industry reliant on cargo planes, winter storage cribs, permafrost maps, and the sheer will of bush pilots navigating the dark winter skies. The last frontier demands resilience from the moment you arrive, and it does not stop demanding it when you pass away. Living in Alaska is an exercise in surviving extreme geography. But as the logistics of the 1,000-mile Hearse prove, even in death, the map dictates absolutely everything.